25-mile-per-hour speed limit reduction hits the brakes in City Council.
Some city leaders are backing a plan to reduce Chicago's speed limit to 25 miles per hour.
Supporters of the proposal say this will improve safety for drivers and pedestrians as well. Our Charday Gray spoke with drivers about this possible change.
I'm all for it.
Bronzeville resident Julietta Nellums is all for the city to possibly reduce the speed limit in her neighborhood.
Cars are zipping past, so I wish they would either give us speed bumps, or I'm all in favor of the reduced speed limit.
The motion carries.
The City Council Committee on Pedestrian and Traffic Safety approved lowering the speed limit from 30 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour by an 8-5 vote. This would not affect streets under the jurisdiction of the Illinois Department of Transportation, like DuSable Lakeshore Drive. The measure was introduced by Alderman Daniel Spata. He says many other major cities in the U.S. have reduced their default speed limit to 25 miles per hour or lower, as well as a handful of Chicago suburbs, including Evanston, Wheaton, and Aurora. Spata says after New York City reduced its speed limit to 25 miles per hour in 2014, there was a 23% reduction in pedestrian deaths and a 39% drop in crashes.
I believe that the ordinance that we're voting on today sets us on the pathway to save the lives of hundreds of people, hundreds of Chicagoans over the next decade.
The speed limit measure would amend the city's existing ordinance, reducing it from 30 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour on city streets. Streets with speed limits lowered past 30 miles per hour, like this one, would not have their existing speed limits lowered any further.
So Alderman Daniel Spata has pushed the measure since last year in a bid to increase traffic safety. But some alder people worry Black and brown Chicagoans will be disproportionately impacted by enforcement. So this is to really establish what this measure is, why it was introduced, and why it's being halted. I'm going to deep dive into what the alder people said after City Council session ended, and also provide some context as to how we got to this point. So City Hall, a proposal to reduce Chicago's default speed limit on city-controlled roads to 25 miles per hour did not move forward on Wednesday. That's January 15, 2025, despite its sponsor, Alderman Spata, filing a notice the week prior to call the ordinance for a final vote. As I mentioned before, the measure is sponsored by Alderman Spata, Daniel Spata of the 1st Ward, who has said that the reduction will boost Chicago's Vision Zero action plan to eliminate traffic deaths citywide. So providing some context on the Vision Zero action plan briefly, so this is a Chicago initiative to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries by 2026. This was first introduced in 2017 under Mayor Rahm Emanuel was in office. And some of the goals, just to quickly give you some of the benchmarks here. So again, this was introduced in 2017, and at the time, two of the plans were to reduce deaths from traffic crashes 20% citywide by 2020, and then also to reduce serious injuries from traffic crashes 35% by 2020. I personally don't know if they achieved those 2020 goals, but that can be for another video. We're here to discuss the proposal to reduce city speed limits to 25 miles per hour. Getting back to the measure, proponents of reducing the speed limit have pointed to city data that shows a person struck by a vehicle traveling at 20 miles per hour has only a 5% chance of dying, while the number grows to 40%. 40%. If that individual is traveling at 30 miles per hour. So a 10% difference, nearly a 35% difference in your chances of dying. So clearly a higher rate of speed lends itself to more fatalities, motor vehicle fatalities. Some older people, however, remain skeptical of the change, especially over concerns about enforcement and possibility that Chicago drivers would see additional speed camera tickets. The speed camera ticket issue in the city of Chicago has been one that it's a hot topic, to say the least.
A new study shows Chicago's speed cameras are not making the city safer.
But what they are doing is costing Chicagoans millions of dollars in fines. Natalie Bomke joins us now with what else this study found. Natalie.
Corey and Dawn, currently a driver gets a speed camera ticket every 12 seconds in Chicago. It amounts to roughly 2 citations for every Chicago household.
It makes no sense for us to be increasing the speeds around parks and schools when we know what the horrific consequences are.
That's Mayor Lightfoot this summer defending $35 speeding tickets for motorists going just 6 miles over the posted speed limit on the grounds it would improve public safety.
If it's not actually increasing safety and making our streets near parks and schools safer, what are we paying for? And a lot of this ticket revenue is brought in from our Chicago residents who can least afford it.
And that's the executive vice president of the Illinois Policy Institute, a group releasing new numbers showing while the city's speed camera program is bringing in boatloads of money to the tune of $84 million last year, it's not making you safer.
In 43% of the school cameras, we've seen an increase in crashes in the vicinity in 2022. And for 51% of the park cameras, we've seen an increase in collisions.
What's more, the Policy Institute found 2 of the city's top grossing speed cameras were located on the city's south side.
A lot of these Chicagoans who are being ticketed cannot afford this. And that's not even including all of the revenue from late fees, 21%.
But the pain could be short-lived. Both mayoral candidates, Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson, have said they will reduce the number of speed cameras in the city of Chicago.
And we're going to get into other granular reasons why certain alders think that different neighborhoods might be impacted differently than others. While the measure passed the necessary council committee in October, the Spata ultimately did not bring it up for a vote last year. On Wednesday, that's January 15th, he again withheld it from facing a final vote after failing to secure enough support to ensure its passage. Alder people did approve a resolution also backed by La Spata to create a working group that would examine Chicago's traffic laws and design a more equitable enforcement system, including fines and fees reform. That measure passed by a 49-1 vote, with only Alderman Brian Hopkins of the 2nd Ward voting against it. So clearly the alders, they want to see changes introduced to the speed limit enforcement system. They just want to go about it in a way that takes into consideration all the factors. After Wednesday's council meeting, La Spata pledged to bring the speed limit ordinance back for a vote. Logan Square Alderman and a Wicker Park Alderman said there were a lot of folks who have real enforcement concerns who still see rising numbers of pretextual traffic stops in their communities, who are concerned about whether we're doing this for the revenue or not. They deserve those concerns to be taken seriously.
We got cameras everywhere.
Dyra Brooks owns Scoop's Hair Mechanics, a barber shop and mechanic shop in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood. She's received several speed camera tickets for going 6 to 10 miles per hour over the speed limit.
I'm not rich. It's kind of overwhelming, especially with the price of living in Chicago.
When they were first introduced, speed cameras in Chicago only ticketed drivers going 11 miles or more per hour above the speed limit. That cost drivers $100. But in March of 2021, former Mayor Lori Lightfoot added a rule allowing $35 citations for drivers going 6 to 10 over. Some can test or pay them here in traffic court.
I know that they're trying to keep everything safe, but I just think it's about money.
Amisha Odom says she's gotten 5 recent speed camera tickets going 6 to 10 over the limit.
My tickets was just basically just racking up.
Alders go on to say, we're going to talk to those folks who felt uncomfortable and get them to a place where they feel more comfortable. Citing that, they'll be back at the table here. So as of now, I guess the alders, have gone into their wards, really had discussions with the residents there, and they are taking those concerns seriously, and that's why they don't want to make a vote at this moment until they've really addressed some of those concerns. And we're gonna get into those concerns that we, the people of the city, brought up to our alders that resulted in this halt, in this postponed vote on the speed limit. Some more on the speed limit proposal. The speed limit proposal comes as traffic deaths in Chicago have declined from a pandemic high, although that reduction mostly plateaued last year. In 2023, 136 people died in traffic crashes in Chicago, down from 186 in 2021. According to a report issued by the Chicago Department of Transportation, last year, 133 people died in traffic crashes, according to preliminary data shared the week of the council. Department Commissioner Tom Carney has endorsed the speed limit change, citing it as one way to make Chicago streets safer, along with additional bike lanes and other infrastructure upgrades. The bike lane matter, that's a whole another story in and of itself. As a biker, I know that motorists are not always keen to where bike lanes are, where bicyclists, folks on bikes are, and that in and of itself can also lead to some issues on the sharing the road. Really, other large cities like New York City, Seattle, Boston have lowered their default speed limits in recent years and seen a reduction in crashes, according to Illinois Answers Project. So we have data from other cities comparable to Chicago that speed reductions work. I'm not sure specifically where these current speed limits in New York, Seattle, and Boston currently sit. Perhaps I'll look into that. But we have data. We can compare apples to apples, literally, comparing a New York to a Chicago. I think that will give us some insight. Spata on Wednesday stressed that the change was not about bringing in new revenue for the city, but making Chicago streets safer. Still, some critics worried the reduction could lead to a spike in speeding tickets that would disproportionately impact drivers of color. In 2022, a ProPublica report shows that households in predominantly Black and Latino Chicago neighborhoods received tickets at around twice the rate of those in white areas between 2015 and 2019.
The ABC7 data team also found out where most of the 6 to 10 tickets are being issued in the last 2 years. The number one revenue generator is at 536 East Morgan Drive in Washington Park, issuing more than $4,720,000 in tickets.
I think that it's more important thing that we can invest in the city to serve safety outside of just trying to track how fast people are going.
So clearly, this specifically is a hot topic, that residents have stressed. Not necessarily the safety component, but the targeting component, how certain communities will be impacted more so than others.
A handful of aldermen objected to the measure, suggesting Chicago take a more targeted approach.
To suggest that a 25-mile-an-hour maximum speed limit applies across the board on the city makes zero sense. It doesn't make sense on Irving Park in Alderman Spizzaro's ward. It doesn't make sense on Harlem Avenue on the far northwest side. It doesn't make sense on Stony Island Avenue on the south side.
The council and the residents' concerns, I think, obviously, how different neighborhoods are going to be impacted economically. And when I say economically, I mean in terms of how higher rates of ticketing will impact them, and also in terms of how a reduced speed limit may impact their ability to, go about being a citizen, going to work, dropping off their kids, going to different events. Mayor Brandon Johnson said last year that he is in favor of reducing the speed limit, but later pumped the brakes on his support over concerns about enforcement disparity. So I think this is a situation where, a few alders, made their concerns known. other elders kind of felt the pressure to, listen more to residents and, voice those concerns. And then, that kind of spread. And we got to a point where everyone, including the mayor now, who once was in support of this proposal, are now they just want to pump the brakes. So I want to go into some components of the resolution that I think are important to note as the council thinks about next steps. And this also provides context as to why certain older people want to take their time before making a decision. So this is the resolution introduced by Daniel Spata. This was, I believe this was let me see here. So this was first introduced October 2024. No, sorry. So it was first introduced July 2024. And I think components of it were published in October 2024. So between July 2024 and October 2024, that's where everything you're seeing now and I'm reading, that's the time frame that it all fell in. So the components of this resolution that I think are noteworthy have to do with the geographic regions that these cameras are located. That's one. The geography of the areas and how that lends itself to, varying behavior by motorists. That's two. And then lastly, dollars and cents. How much money is this bringing in? Specifically, how much money is it bringing in certain neighborhoods? So those are going to be a few things that I'll unpack here. So
cities across the country have used them for decades, and today nearly 200 communities have them in place. But critics say that in places like Chicago, the tickets and fines they generate disproportionately fall on Black and brown residents. Economics correspondent Paul Salmon has our report.
An open road in Black South Chicago.
This is another example of an arterial street with terrible infrastructure that encourages people to speed.
And at the same time has cameras that send out tickets automatically, points out Obayi Reed, Chicago traffic reform activist.
The infrastructure is horrible in our neighborhoods. Potholes, multi-lane streets, highways, entrance and exit ramps, arterial streets like Stony Island, Ashland.
And speaking of Ashland, the speeds on this avenue, says garage owner Shay Sumter, are sometimes
at least 60 to 70 miles an hour. Really? It's like a highway.
Truth be told, if I weren't here for a story on speeding fines, I'd probably be cruising at around 40 myself. Good thing I wasn't.
Homework, everything like
Hairdresser Dyra Brooks, who runs a salon next to Shay Sumter's garage, had no such reminder.
I got a speed ticket. I was going like 35, 36.
In a 30-mile-an-hour zone. And then
I never received any tickets in the mail. That next Friday, I had a boot on my truck.
Chicago introduced automated speed cameras in 2013. The fine, $35 for going 10 miles an hour over the limit. But in 2021, the threshold was cut to 6 miles an hour over. Chicago has since raked in an extra $120 million, paid mostly, according to ProPublica, by drivers of color.
The program was rolled out under the auspices that it was all about public safety.
City Council member Anthony Beal represents the city's largely black 9th Ward.
We've learned that it's not about public safety, that the entire system is about generating revenue.
You're an alderman. The city does need money, right?
The city does need money, but if we're going to generate revenue, it needs to be off the backs of the entire city of Chicago and not targeted towards the black and brown communities where the people are hurting the most. I've had residents go to the grocery store. They got a ticket going to the grocery store and they got a ticket going home from the grocery store.
Those are the same neighborhoods that are food deserts.
Stacy Sutton has studied literally millions of tickets given in Chicago from 2016 to 2019. Who got them disproportionately?
Majority black neighborhoods or majority Latinx neighborhoods, those are the same neighborhoods that have less access to public transportation.
And more tickets they can't afford. Dyra Brooks paid the first just to unboot her car.
Then when I paid that, then I had to get on a payment plan for the rest of them.
Because the tickets, 8 or 9 in total, had doubled in price due to late fees.
I'm happy that we're talking about it because my payment plan is due tomorrow. So
it reminds you.
Remind me. But
that's what these interviews are useful for.
So well, I appreciate you.
Oh, please.
There was a case of a firefighter in Chicago, a black man who lived on the South Side. He purchased a car for his son that was sitting on a lot. That car sitting on a lot accumulated tickets.
17 of them, with late fees, $30,000.
He can file for bankruptcy or lose his job. That's when I learned that Chicago has the highest rate of personal bankruptcy cases related to fines and fees.
In the country.
In the country.
Flat fines and fees of this sort have become a notorious way for cities to make money, as in Ferguson, Missouri, which helped trigger the uprising of 2015. The Justice Department concluded that, quote, Ferguson's strategy of revenue generation through policing has fostered practices that are themselves unconstitutional. These practices disproportionately harm African Americans.
Ferguson is the big case, but there's so many cases.
There is, however, it turns out, an alternative.
In the U.S., you pay maybe $200 for a fine. In Finland, you pay maybe 1%. It's in direct proportion to your income.
Of your total income, says U.S.-born Helsinki journalist Matt Schilke, which, if you're wealthy NHL hockey player Rasmus Ristolainen, meant a fine of $135,000 for going 50 in a 25-mile-per-hour zone just a few years ago.
This is something that's been in Finnish society for decades and probably will be for the next decades to come.
Good old egalitarian Finland, whose policy Chicago Alderman Daniel Spata admires.
I think that's a great idea. I honestly know colleagues who are working on ordinances geared around that very idea right now in the city council.
But Spata recently rejected a move to switch the speed at which tickets are issued back to 10 miles over the limit from 6.
We've kept it at 6 because we know that that is more likely to keep you alive in the case of a crash. We know that at 30 miles per hour, the likelihood of a pedestrian, a cyclist, even a driver dying in that crash is about 20-30%. At 40 miles per hour, that goes up to 90% likelihood of you dying in that crash.
As some of his constituents have.
I've met with the fathers and mothers of 7- and 8-year-olds who were killed because of the speeds that were being driven by motorists.
But, says Ashland garage owner Shay Sumter,
it was 3 deaths last year.
3 deaths on it right here.
Right on Ashland.
Don't the speed cameras discourage that kind of speeding?
No. It needs to be a physical person instead of a camera.
So what about physical patrol cars?
Police-related ticketing can lead to horrendous outcomes, and we've seen that for Black and Latinx communities especially, but especially for Black communities.
The real goal, says activist Obayi Reed, to make Chicago's most speed-inviting streets less so. More bus lanes, pedestrian islands, crosswalks. Because as things stand,
we're putting the financial burden on communities that's already poor instead of the city investing in engineering to solve the problem of traffic violence here.
Alderman Spata's response? We're working on it, with millions of dollars set aside in the city budget, including, he predicts, upgrading Ashland Avenue. I've been a journalist for a very long time. I drove down Ashland, I stood at Ashland, I watched cars go by. If I'm a betting man, I'm betting that there's no significant improvement of the infrastructure on Ashland Avenue by the time I come back to Chicago in, say, 5 years. Am I crazy?
I would love to take you up on that bet. I don't think you win that bet, Paul.
For PBS News Weekend, Paul Solman in Chicago, hoping, not for the first time, that mine will be a losing bet.
Now, right behind me on the corner of State and Harrison, we have a speed camera. And even though the speed camera is on the same block as a high school, another factor to take into consideration when the council really re-examines the whole speed limit and where those speed limits are going to be throughout the city is, the psychological element of where speed cameras are and how motorists behave whenever they see either a red light camera or a speed limit. So this speed camera here, it's probably one of few speed cameras in this South Loop area. And so a motorist, especially one that's not used to happening upon a speed limit, if this new measure goes into effect and there are different speed limits posted throughout the city, they may behave in a manner that causes more vehicle fatalities. So, for example, they may see the speed camera and immediately pump the brakes, which may cause a cascading effect of cars behind them that cause them to brake, resulting in rear end incidents. Similar to what we saw with the red light cameras when those were introduced. A lot of people would see a red light camera and in order to prevent a fine from finding its way into their mailbox, they would immediately pump the brakes, but the person behind them, either because they weren't paying attention or they just weren't expecting someone to immediately pump the brakes out of the blue, would get into a rear end collision. And so that's another thing to keep in mind. These additional speed cameras or different speed limit postings throughout the city may result in more rear end collisions or more fatalities inadvertently because of the psychological element of how people behave when they see these cameras.
The ABC7 data team researched the crash numbers on the city's data portal and found this. From March of 2019 to February 28th of 2021, 2 years before 6 to 10 ticketing, there were nearly 1,800 incapacitating injury or fatal crashes within 250 meters of a speed camera. From March of 2021 to February 28th of 2023, the 2 years after the 6 to 10 mile per hour rule went into effect, there were about 1,900 incapacitating injury or fatal crashes within 250 meters of a camera.
I know that they're trying to keep everything safe, but I just think it's about money.
And what about that revenue? Under the Freedom of Information Act, we found there has been a drastic increase. In the 2-year period before the 6 to 10 rule went into effect, the city made about $77 million on speed cameras. For the 2 years after the new rule started, the city made more than twice as much money, about $185,200,000 in tickets. 60% of those tickets were from people going 6 to 10 miles per hour over the limit.
So that breaks down why this measure was, they kind of, hit the pause button on this measure for the time being. They really want to weigh all the pros and cons before moving forward. I think, I appreciate the alders for sharing the reasons why. Obviously, this is something that we're going to be monitoring throughout 2025, and I'm curious to see how everything shapes up.